I spent 6 hours preparing Thanksgiving dishes, and my daughter-in-law came to visit and said, "What does this stink about?" We brought food from a restaurant. "You can't feed yours to dogs." The son laughed, and her mother said that my turkey looked as if someone had already eaten it. I am Sophie, and this was my last Thanksgiving with my family. Stop humiliating me. I am a woman with dignity. You want the play-by-play? Pull up a chair. I'll pour you some sweet tea. Mine doesn't curdle souls. Thanksgiving starts for me 3 days early, with a list that could pass a Navy inspection and a cart that needed 4 squeaky wheels to keep up. I chose the bugs, yes, those buggy little mysteries everyone else ignores. The bay leaves with that peppery snap, the star anise that winks like a mischievous sheriff's star. I picked cranberries one by one because the bag always hides a few mushy freeloaders. I pressed the sweet potatoes like avocados at a California farmer's market and tapped the butternut squash the way my mother taught me. If it thunks like a low drum, you've got the good one. The turkey? 14 pounds of hope and habit. I dry brined it with kosher salt and orange zest, tucked butter under the skin like secret love letters, slid in thyme sprigs, and whispered a prayer that had worked for me since 1992. Turn out right and I'll take the credit. Turn out wrong and I'll blame the oven. I built the menu like a parade lineup. Maple bourbon turkey with citrus herb butter, cornbread stuffing studded with sage sausage and tart apple, green beans sautéed with shallots and almond slivers, mashed potatoes smoothed with cream and a scandalous amount of butter, gravy with backbone, 2 pies, pecan for my son because I'm sentimental, and pumpkin for my grandbabies because they once called it the orange cloud, and for dessert number 3 because I am that kind of grandmother. Cinnamon sugar churro bites with a chocolate dip thick enough to slow traffic. At 4:45 am, the house was mine and the world smelled like coffee, nutmeg, and second chances. I tied on my apron, faded sunflowers, frayed tie, my battle colors, and got to work. Music low, knife steady, rhythm sure. The kitchen lights made everything gleam like possibility. I basted, whisked, folded. I talked to the turkey like it was a stubborn child and swatted the smoke alarm with a dish towel when it got dramatic about the bacon for the sprouts. By 9, pies cooled on the sill like a painting. By 10, the turkey had that lacquered magazine cover sheen. By 11, the table was set in my best linen inherited from my mother, porcelain that only comes out on days that matter. I knotted napkins with raffia cords, tucked in rosemary, placed tiny name cards because I am not a cafeteria and I do not seek chaos. At noon, my heart jumped when the first car door slammed. My son's laugh rolled up the driveway even before he stepped inside. It used to be my favorite sound. Lately it arrives with a memo. "Mom, prepare to be minimized." He kissed the air near my cheek, eyes on his phone. Behind him, my daughter-in-law in a dress that could bankrupt a college savings plan. Her parents trailing in with glossy shopping bags like they were checking into a weekend at the Ritz. The grandchildren burst past with their backpacks, my 2 pockets of pure sunshine, and I wanted to grab them and keep running. "Something smells aggressive," my daughter-in-law Naomi said, fanning the air with a menu from the fancy restaurant in town. "Don't worry, Sophie, we brought food. Real food." "The turkey looks touched," her mother added, peering into my oven as if it were a terrarium where an odd lizard lived. As though someone already had a turn, my son chuckled the way cowards do in expensive shoes. I swallowed the kind of reply that starts wars. "You're right on time," I said instead. "Everything's ready." And it was. I carved the turkey through that crisp skin and watched the steam lift like good gossip. The first platter went to the sideboard. Naomi's father plunked down a tower of restaurant boxes right next to it, elbows claiming territory. He grabbed a fork and sampled my potatoes without asking, then reached for his craft martini. He brings his own ingredients, because of course he does, and splashed it across my runner. "Whoops," he said, smiling like a toddler who discovered gravity. Naomi parked herself at the head of the table, the seat I set for my son, and started issuing orders, all softness over steel. "Kids, don't touch grandma's traditional things. We don't want anyone getting sick. Here, have the lobster mac." The children hesitated, glancing toward me. I nodded like an usher at a difficult movie. "Eat what you like, my loves," I said. "Grandma's house has many exits." They giggled, not understanding. God bless them. My son ladled out restaurant gravy with a flourish and said, "Mom, maybe next time we should cater. Less stress on you. Less stress on me." The woman who had just cooked a whole holiday while he practiced his mirror smile. We ate, or rather, They ate from their takeout summit while I tried to keep the peace until peace looked like complicity. Naomi's mother launched into a monologue about their ski plans. We only do Aspen, of course, and her husband had a talent for turning any topic into a display window for his opinions. My son? He laughed at her punchlines about home-style food and cracked an old joke about how I used to burn toast when he was 8. I didn't burn toast. I burned out trying to be mother, father, peacemaker, paycheck, and punchline-proof wall. But facts are not invited to that kind of comedy. Naomi daintily pushed my stuffing to the side and said, loud enough for the chandelier to file a complaint, Sophie, you're sweet for trying. But maybe let the professionals step in. My parents have refined palates. She winked at her mother, and they shared the kind of look that knits a club out of superiority. Besides, my son added, casual as a hammer, you always oversalt. His smile said it was a harmless tease. My memory said he'd picked up that line from Naomi, who used it the first time she ever tasted my chili and then said she was just being honest. Honesty without kindness is just a weapon with a Hallmark tag. I felt something old in me sit up. I've carried many names: mama, widow, worker, peacemaker, the lady who brings orange slices to Little League. I am not a mat to scrape your holidays on. Naomi's father reached for the salad I'd tossed with citrus and pomegranate jewels, and before I could offer the serving spoon, he used his fork, stabbed straight in, and chewed like he was testing a horse. Needs acid, he announced, as if applying a dealership sticker to my bowl. My son laughed again. The sound didn't land in my ear, it landed in my gut, and that's when the decision arrived. Clear as a bell on a quiet street, I stood up. You know, I said, I think something's missing. Naomi didn't look up. Flavor, respect, I said. I gathered the edge of my linen tablecloth, my mother's, which had seen births and wakes and one legendary card game, and I pulled. Slowly first, then with the clean yank years of laundry had trained into my wrist. The movement was almost elegant, a curtain call for every slight. The dishes took a beat to understand, then obeyed physics. The salad bowl kissed Naomi's couture like a devoted fan. A green ribbon of dressing painted her bodice, a cranberry ricochet found her forehead. My gravy made a low, satisfied splash across her father's suit, and his martini pour, delicate thing leapt from his hand to baptize his lapels. The restaurant boxes slid in a synchronized swan dive to the hardwood, opening midair like white paper mouths. Silence. Then the soft percussion of Brussels sprouts rolling across oak. No one breathed, not even me. I stood there holding the tablecloth like a magician who'd finally decided the trick was over. Naomi found her voice first. You are insane. My son just stared, mouth ajar, something like a kid who'd pushed and now discovered the fence was electric. I walked to the front door, opened it wide to the cold, clean afternoon. Sunlight squared itself on the rug like a judge's bench. The celebration is over, I said without heat. Everyone, go out. Naomi sputtered a protest that had more consonants than sense. Her parents stumbled to their feet, dripping salad and outrage. My son, his face flushed, started toward me with that half-stride menus when they want to loom without committing. I didn't step back, not an inch. You can't be serious, he whispered. I am past serious, I said. I am done. Naomi's mother made a sound somewhere between a cough and a snort. We are family. You arrived as critics, I said. Family comes hungry and humble. The grandchildren watched with the stunned, wide-eyed attention children reserve for magic and grown-up truth. I knelt, reached for them, and pressed kisses to their foreheads. You are always welcome, I told them. Always. Call me for cookies, for rides, for secrets, not for permission to be loved. They nodded, solemn as owls. Naomi hissed my name like it had offended her mouth. Sophie. Door, I said and gestured. When no one moved, I stood and let the quiet grow teeth. My son knows my silences. He finally gathered the coats, muttered something about me needing help, and shepherded his empire of boxes and injured pride outside. Naomi paused on the threshold, salad jeweled across her dress like battle decoration. You will regret this. My smile was small and surgical, doubtful. The door clicked shut on their winter air. I leaned my forehead against the wood and let the house exhale. Then I turned around and surveyed the battlefield. Pies intact on the sill, turkey still shining like it hadn't just witnessed a revolution, floor performing modern art in cranberry and glass. I laughed. It wasn't pretty, and it was not ladylike, but it was mine. I cleaned, slowly, methodically, wiping up every insult disguised as vinaigrette, every just being honest embedded in gravy. I packed plates for the neighbors, texted the widow to doors down, "You like bourbon turkey?" and left a box on the porch of the young couple who always bring my trash bins in on windy days. I ate a churro bite at the sink and tasted cinnamon, sugar, and a promise to myself. While the dishwasher hummed, I sat at the table clothless now, wood warm beneath my palms, and let my mind step through the last 2 years like a crime scene reconstruction. My son before marriage, the boy who'd call from college just to tell me he'd found a used bookstore. After marriage, the man who turned our Sunday dinners into auditions for his wife's approval. He'd started correcting me lightly at first. "Mom, you mean arugula, not rocket," then emboldened by her laughter, upgraded to open McKnight. "Careful. Mom made it. Might be oversalted." Naomi had taught him to turn me into a punchline. He'd learned fast. And the calls, the way they slowed until silence felt like a scheduled appointment I'd missed. When I'd phoned to ask how he was, he'd sigh like kindness was expensive and his limit had been reached. "Busy, Mom? Don't start." If I asked about the kids, I was intrusive. If I dropped off soup, it was not their cuisine. If I pointed out he hadn't come by in 3 weeks, he'd say, "You're being dramatic." It's funny how accusations of drama tend to show up when someone's avoiding the plot. Then came the house talk. Naomi scouting my square footage the way a developer watches a skyline. "We could help you downsize," she cooed, like she was discussing earrings. My son, nodding along, suddenly fluent in "for your own good." Sell the house, move closer to them, into something manageable, which meant beige and next to their rules. They positioned it as compassion. It reeked of conquest. I told them no, in all the languages I know. They heard later. I washed my hands, dried them on a towel older than their marriage, and felt a steadiness settle in my bones. That door I'd closed, it wasn't only on an afternoon. It was on a pattern, on the long slow shrinking of me to fit someone else's comfort. The phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my son, paragraphs blooming on the screen like a rash. It started with, "Mom, about earlier, deetered through you, embarrassed Naomi," and parked right where I expected. "We should revisit the house situation. It's too much for you." Then, like a ribbon, a final flourish. "But let's put this behind us. We got you something, an early Christmas gift. A ski trip. We'll all go." Fresh start. A ski trip. These people can't walk across my kitchen without stomping, and they want to put me on a mountain. I typed. Noted. I didn't send it. Not yet. I let my thumb hover over the screen while a small, amused feeling took root. Sometimes the worst gift is the best reveal. A trip can be a trap. It can also be a stage. The house sighed around me, the kind of quiet some people find lonely. I find it honest. I opened the window to let in the crisp bite of late afternoon and the sound of leaves whispering, "Change, change, change." I am Sophie, 59 years old. I make luminous turkey and foolish allowances, but I do not make the same mistake twice. Today I pulled a tablecloth. Tomorrow I will pull something more permanent, my dignity out from under a family that thought it could keep eating off it. The phone buzzed again. A new text from Naomi, shorter than her dress hem. "Ski trip is booked. Aspen, we'll handle everything. Just show up." I smiled, not because I was flattered, but because I'd already decided something she didn't know yet. The next time I showed up, it would be on my terms. And as for Thanksgiving, let the record show, the pies were glorious, the turkey loyal, the churros consoling, in the door, when I closed it, sounded exactly like freedom. The morning after my tablecloth moment, my kitchen looked like a crime scene that had the decency to tidy up after itself. I made coffee strong enough to take the varnish off a boat and reread the messages about Aspen. Naomi's texts had that chirpy efficiency of a flight attendant closing the door. Non-refundable. "Sophie, so don't be difficult." My son sent a thumbs up and a snowflake like we were in kindergarten. I said yes. Why? Because sometimes you accept an invitation to a stage whose curtain they think they control. You bring your own script. I dug my ski clothes out of storage, the ones from back when my husband and I used to go to a scrappy New Mexico hill that sold chili in paper cups and lift tickets on a rope from a nail. I shook out the jacket and a ticket stub fell from the pocket. Dated 2003. My throat tightened. He'd called me his slope wife when we were both still bendy. I used to pretend to be insulted while secretly loving the way his hand found the small of my back in a line for the chair. When he died, the hill kept the snow but lost its invitation. His company had been my other winter. Logistics, boring to some, but for me it hums like a well-tuned engine, moving parts that arrive where they're supposed to be. After he passed, I'd shepherded it through probate like a stiff-necked mule and then stepped back when the grief made numbers swim. I'd told my boy that someday half of it would be his. When you're ready, I'd said, which is the kind of sentence that breeds misunderstanding like rabbits. Aspen was glossy in the way catalogs lie. The airport smiled at you with glass, and the shuttle driver pronounced my name like I was the wrong luggage. Naomi met me in a white parka that could be seen from the space station. Finally, she announced, air kissing my cheek and leaving a comet trail of expensive perfume. My son hugged me longer than usual. I let him, because honey on a hook is still honey. They'd booked a suite with a view that could redeem a few sins and a kitchenette that would never be used. The grandkids ran circles like small weather systems. Their joy is my one remaining weak spot. Naomi's parents were there too, of course, crowding the couch, commenting on the altitude as if they'd invented it. Let's do the lodge for dinner, Naomi said. It's got live music and proper cuisine, she said proper while looking pointedly at me, as if I were smuggling casserole under my coat. On the slope the next day, I skied alone slow, careful, remembering how my body used to trust itself. The mountain is a teacher that doesn't spare your ego. It lets you wobble and bruise and then it hands you a view for consolation. I reached a quiet turn where the pines held onto the snow like secret keepers and laughed out loud. It startled 3 teenagers who skidded and apologized and called me ma'am like it was both insult and prayer. That night, the lodge was all timbers and twinkle lights, the band doing something twangy with conviction. We sat at a long table. Naomi ordered for the table because she always loves a kingdom with menus. She chose mulled wine for everyone, deep red, spiced, curling steam like it had something good to say. My son's smile had a rehearsed quality that makes me itch. He'd been wearing that smile since the wedding photos. He and Naomi danced after the appetizers. She performs enthusiasm the way some people do yoga. The more it hurts, the deeper she goes. I held my glass and watched the band. The singer had the kind of voice you forgive for being slightly off-key because he believes his own heart. Pretty, isn't she? A waitress leaned in to clear a plate. Her name tag said Lupita. She had eyes like the truth, unblinking, kind, and more complicated than they first appear. The mulled wine, I mean. It is, I said, swirling it. I had a habit of smelling first, learned from cooking and suspicion. She hesitated, a deer deciding whether the meadow is worth the risk. Then she dipped closer, breath warm with cinnamon. Don't drink that, she whispered, so soft I wasn't sure it was real. I saw your daughter-in-law put something in it when you went to the restroom. Smiled at me the whole time like it was a joke. I looked at the glass. The steam curled on, innocent as a lullaby. Are you sure? I asked, though in my bones the answer had already arrived a full minute early. Lupita's mouth tightened. I know the difference between sugar and a pill. She touched my sleeve in apology for the message. Be careful. Time slowed like it had jammed. The band strummed through it. The room laughed through it. My son twirled a woman who wasn't his wife because Naomi had spun toward the bar to refresh her performance. My heartbeat was steady, a metronome judging a dancing bear. I stood, lifted my glass, and made for the bar as if seeking a better view. Naomi saw me, sparkling with sweat and victory. Isn't this fun? She said, breathless. Hair perfect like mischief never musses. Fun enough, I said, and set my glass next to her and touched one. Dance with your husband. You've got the shoes for it. They sashayed back out, the two of them wrapped in a loop of their own reflected glamour. I swapped the glasses like a street magician. No flourish, no drama, just the simplest trick. Her glass to me, mine to her. I returned to the table. There's a kind of silence you sit inside, the kind where your own breath sounds like someone else's. I watched Naomi return to the bar, throw back a few gulps, and smirk into nothing. I set my own glass aside and asked Lupita for hot water with lemon. She brought it fast, bless that woman, and I held the mug like a small, sensible shield. It didn't take 5 minutes. Naomi's voice lifted a half tone then slid a whole. Woo, she said, a word she only uses when she's about to be unkind. She tossed her hair at my son and missed her head. She stepped off the beat by a margin you could measure with a yardstick. Then the words started, bright and ugly, as if a sewer had learned to sing. Look at these boots, she cried, pointing to a woman at the next table. Where'd you buy them? Tractor Supply. Laughter leaked from a few corners with the guilty eagerness of people who think proximity absolves them. She turned to the band and shouted, play something people with money listen to. Her father tried to shush her. She swatted his hand. My son reached for her elbow. She jerked away. Don't touch me, she said, loud enough to move air. Around us, faces shifted, pity, disgust, fascination. She climbed onto an empty chair, almost fell, recovered like a novice tightrope walker who suddenly remembers gravity is a real thing, and announced, "I'm the queen of this place." It would have been funny if it weren't so educational. My son's face went from red to ash. He looked at me, panic, apology, calculation flickering like those electric fireplaces that never get warm. Out on the floor, Naomi directed her attention to me. "And you," she said, pointing, arm wobbling. "You're welcome for the trip. Without us, you'd be in your sad little kitchen talking to a turkey." I took a slow sip of lemon water and said, "To no one, Sophie, breathe." I breathed. I watched the poison reveal itself, wearing her face. Security approached with the gentle grimness of men who have seen many versions of this story. My son tried to intercept them, pleading that she was just tired, a phrase rich people invented to excuse bad behavior in nicer shoes. They coaxed Naomi down. She teetered, blinked, then announced she needed the bathroom, then sat in another woman's lap to get there. It took both guards and her father to shepherd her out into the cold where air might slap sense back into her. Lupita refilled my lemon water as if we were in a church, and this was holy. I looked at her and let the truth sit quietly between us. My daughter-in-law had meant to drug me. She hadn't counted on a whispering waitress or my habit of not swallowing everything offered. When my son returned, he looked 10 years older. She's sick," he said. A child caught holding a broken vase, insisting it fell on its own. "Altitude," he added lamely. "New medication." I met his eyes and kept my voice low and free of notes. "You watched." He opened his mouth, closed it, went for a sentence and fetched a squeak. His shoulders slumped. "I didn't know," he said finally, which might even have been true, but was certainly less true than he wanted it to be. "Then now you do," I said. That night, in my room, I packed. Not in a furious packing leaves socks behind. I folded sweaters, zipped pouches, gathered the souvenirs I'd bought for the kids, 2 fuzzy hats shaped like bears, ridiculous and necessary, and left Naomi's family to manage what they'd poured. I wrote a note for the grandkids. Grandma had to go feed the wild turkeys at home. They only eat at dawn. Be kind to your parents. Call me when you want hot chocolate that listens. I left it with the hats and a tip for Lupita, engorged enough to float her through a few soft months. On the envelope, "To the woman who warned me." I checked out before dawn. The sky was pre-breath, the mountain a dark shoulder asleep under stars that didn't care. In the shuttle, I watched the lodge recede in the rearview mirror like a lesson ending. The driver had a radio playing an old love song in Spanish. I don't know the words, but I know the weather of them. On the plane, I slept the clean sleep of someone who has stopped giving people the rope to hang her with. I woke over Kansas to the glow of texts lighting up my phone like a bad carnival. Naomi alternating between apology, "I think I ate something," and accusation, "Were you trying to embarrass me?" My son vacillating between concern and control. I did not reply. Not yet. There's a delicious power in withholding the very thing people assume they can harvest: your attention. Home smelled like itself, wood and lemon oil and the faint memory of cinnamon singing in the oven. I made soup because soup restores the parts of you that pride can't reach. I sat at my table and pulled out the folder holding the company papers, the ones I hadn't touched in a year, telling myself rest was wisdom. The numbers greeted me like old coworkers who never stopped believing in my competence. My boy and I had discussed once, me giving him half when he was ready, when he respected the weight of it. He'd nodded, eager as a dog at a picnic. And then he'd gotten married and the conversation had started showing up with little price tags attached by someone else. He'd called my employees legacy folks and suggested we modernize by firing the ones who looked like the business itself: quiet, loyal, not photogenic for a pitch deck. Ready is not a calendar date, it's a behavior. Last night proved the boy was not. On Sunday, the church bells across town did their reliable counting. I did not go. My prayers were busy finishing their coffee. At noon, a car door thudded, then another. Voices on my porch, my son's careful tone, Naomi's brittle whisper, the children's sweet high notes mixed with a new caution that angered me on their behalf. Knuckles tapped my door, then pounded. "Mom?" My son called. "We brought dinner." I did not answer. "I let my house be a lesson plan." He texted. "Mom, we're outside." Then, "Mom, this is childish." Then, "Open the door. Don't make a scene." I set my phone face down. My soup simmered. My resolve reduced to a glossy sauce. Through the curtain crack, I watched the four of them. The children peeked at the window, then at their parents for permission to be human. Naomi's mother was in the car, pretending not to look. Her father paced like a man who prefers restaurants that let him send things back. My son knocked again, then rested his forehead against the door with the exact posture I'd used after Thanksgiving, the symmetry so clean it almost felt like art. "Please," he said, but the please was aimed at equilibrium, not me. I walked to the door. I didn't open it. I stood there inches from the wood and said, as softly as prayer but with more edge, "The celebration is over. Everyone, go out." Habit, reclaimed and repurposed. On the porch, he stiffened. "This isn't funny, Mom." "No," I said. "It isn't. We wanted to apologize," he tried. "You wanted to reset the board," I said. I flipped it. Silence. Then, because he always reaches for the lever labeled control, he said, "About the company, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we discuss the transition again. It's for your own good. Less stress." I laughed. It startled even me. Not cruel, not loud, just bright enough to be seen from space. "Son," I said, "I am returning to work on Monday." Shock rippled through the door like a new weather pattern. "What?" "I'm rescinding what I said about giving you half. Maybe someday, not now. You are not ready to steward what I built with a good man who never once mocked my cooking." "Mom, you can't." "I can." I did. I let the words sit, heavy enough to dent. "I love you. That doesn't mean I will cosign my own erasure." I heard Naomi whisper, "She can't do that," as if reality takes attendance when she speaks. Her mother honked the horn, a punctuation mark with no grammar. "I'll see the children," I added. "Tuesday for ice cream. You may drop them off." "Don't come in, Mom." His voice cracked on the word like a boy catching a baseball wrong. "There is only room in my house for grandchildren," I said, clear as winter sky. "Neither you nor your wife will come here anymore. You are not my relatives, not my guests. You are nobody." Naomi sucked in a breath so hard I could feel the porch lose air. My son started to speak, then stopped. The children pressed their little palms to the glass, two flowers wanting sun. I put my palm back against the pane, directly across from theirs. They smiled, small, steady. I blew them a kiss large enough to count as shelter. "Go home," I said. "Learn something." They did eventually, the doorbell giving a last hopeful trill before the car carried away the afternoon. I stood alone in my kitchen and felt not loneliness but presence, the presence of a line I'd finally drawn, dark and clean. Tomorrow, I would take my keycard out of the drawer and go stand again inside the spine of the business that outlived my husband and might just outlive this cycle of men who think mothers are ornaments for their wives' ambition. I would call a board meeting. I would ask hard questions and listen to the honest answers. I would be the woman who runs things, not the woman who runs away. But tonight, I ate soup and sliced a piece of pecan pie saved from my Thanksgiving revolution and toasted the ghost of my husband. "You'd have loved that tablecloth trick," I told him. Somewhere, I swear I heard his laugh, the good one that sounds like a door opening. Outside, the wind curled around the eaves. Inside, I sharpened pencils and made a list. On it, in thick, deliberate letters, "Teach him a lesson that lasts." I underlined it twice. Then I slept. Not like a queen. Queens are always worried about their crown, but like a woman who has finally decided to wear her own name. When I walked into my husband's old company that Monday morning, the young receptionist didn't recognize me. She smiled, that brittle, polite smile that people give to harmless old ladies who might be lost. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, in the careful tone used for people who forget their own names. "Yes," I said, setting my purse on the counter like a gavel. "I'm here to help you, darling. Call the boardroom and tell them Sophie Moore is back." Her eyebrows tried to hide in her hairline. She fumbled the phone, whispering something to the office manager, then looked back at me with the wide-eyed look of someone who's just realized she's standing in the middle of a legend they've only heard rumors about. Right away, "Mrs. Moore, that's better." I had been gone a year, told myself it was retirement, told the world I wanted rest. But truth be told, I'd left because grief had knocked the wind out of my lungs and my son's voice had filled the silence with, "Mom, you've done enough. Let me handle things." Handle. What a word. When I stepped back into that glass and steel building, it felt like I'd just returned to my own body. The walls remembered me. The hum of printers and phones sounded like an orchestra tuning up. My husband and I had built this place with late nights, cheap coffee, and mutual stubbornness. We started with one truck and a notebook full of dreams. When he passed, I made sure his name stayed on the door. Now I plan to make sure mine stayed too. The boardroom was a fishbowl of shock when I entered. Half of them stood. The other half stared at their laptops like they could Control-Z me out of existence. Morning, gentlemen and ladies, I said, nodding at the two new faces I didn't recognize. Don't look so alarmed. I'm not here to haunt you. I'm here to work. One of the newer men, a sleek type with gelled hair and two white teeth, cleared his throat. Mrs. Moore, we were told you'd stepped back indefinitely. Your son, my son, I interrupted, has the same authority in this company as that stapler. A ripple of nervous laughter went around the table. I smiled like a woman who just remembered she's still dangerous. I see you've made some changes, I said, glancing at the new company logo on the presentation screen. Modern, minimal, sterile. Looks like something designed by a toothpaste company. A few people coughed. The man with the gelled hair, Bradley, I think, shifted in his seat. I sat down, opened my notebook, and said, let's talk about the budget. Then we'll talk about loyalty. That's how I spent my first day back, dismantling months of half-baked ideas and expensive nonsense. They'd hired consultants who didn't know the first thing about logistics. My son had apparently approved a rebranding campaign that cost as much as a small yacht. Image over integrity. The invoice practically screamed. By lunch, half the board had remembered that I was the woman who'd once run this place during a fuel shortage while handwriting invoices by candlelight. By 5, they were asking me questions again, like students who'd found their teacher alive after summer vacation. I drove home with my window down and my heart full, but I wasn't done. Oh no, I had a son to teach. The next week, he came storming into my office like a wind that had lost its manners. Mom, what are you doing? Running my company, I said, without looking up from the financial report. What are you doing? He sat down hard, the way guilty men do. You blindsided me. The board called me in for an emergency meeting. They said you're reversing my marketing contract. Yes, it was bleeding money and logic. Mom, this isn't the 90s. We need to modernize. Son, I said, folding my hands, modernizing doesn't mean losing your moral compass and your profit margin in the same quarter. He laughed, but it was brittle. You just don't understand how business works anymore. Sweetheart, I said, my smile sugar and steel. I was closing million-dollar deals while you were still learning not to eat paste. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I watched the war behind his eyes between the part of him that still respected me and the part that had learned to belittle me to keep his wife entertained. Finally, he said, Naomi thinks you're overreacting. She says you're just mad about Aspen. Oh, I'm far past mad, I said. Mad is temporary. Clarity is permanent. He stared, not quite processing the threat in that sentence. Tell your wife, I added, that Aspen was her audition. She failed the role. He stood, shaking his head. You're making a mistake, Mom. You're burning bridges. Then I'll build new ones with better material, I said. The last one was rotting. He left in a huff. I waited until the door closed, then let myself smile, the quiet, satisfied kind that doesn't need witnesses. I started calling the people my son had streamlined out, the loyal old hands who'd built the company's backbone. One by one, I brought them back. The next week, the office smelled like coffee and competence again. I took my lunches with Ruby, my head accountant from the old days, a sharp woman who'd once fixed a ledger with a pencil and a threat. You're stirring up ghosts, Sophie, she said. You sure you want this fight? Ruby, I said, I spent 20 years keeping peace. I'm overdue for a good war. Meanwhile, the gossip mill churned. People whispered that Naomi had been seen at the doctor's, testing for allergies after Aspen. Others said she'd blamed a spiked drink at the lodge, conveniently leaving out the part where she'd done the spiking. I didn't spread rumors. I didn't need to. Truth has its own legs. It'll arrive at the finish line even if you don't cheer it on. A week later, I got a letter from my attorney. Apparently my son had tried to initiate a transfer of partial ownership without my signature. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my kitchen stool. I called him that night. Son, I said sweetly, I got your little surprise. It was just paperwork, he stammered. Paperwork, I repeated. You mean the kind that ends up with you running a company you didn't earn? I've shredded better paperwork in my sleep. Mom, I was just ambitious, I said. You were ambitious. That's not a sin. But when you pair it with betrayal, it's called stupidity. He tried to apologize, but I stopped him. You've mistaken my kindness for weakness, dear, and that's my fault. I spoiled you with forgiveness. He was silent. Let me be clear, I said. You are my son. I love you. But from now on, love will not include access to my house, my bank account, or my business. You've graduated from indulgence. Congratulations. I hung up before he could answer. That night, I sat on my porch, wrapped in a blanket and a sense of restoration. The air was sharp with November's bite. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. I raised my mug of cocoa to the stars. You'd be proud, Harold, I said to my husband's absence. The boy's finally learning boundaries, though he's not enjoying the class. But I wasn't done yet. Oh, not by a long shot. Teaching him a lesson required more than cutting him off. It required creativity, a poetic symmetry. The next morning, I opened my email and drafted an announcement for the company website. Effective immediately, Mrs. Sophie Moore will resume her role as executive chairwoman. The company will recommit to its founding values: integrity, innovation, and family. Real family, not the kind that stabs you over dinner rolls. I deleted that last line before sending, but the sentiment remained. I made another decision that day. I'd start a mentorship program for single mothers and businesswomen who, like me, had been told they were too emotional for leadership. If I was going to rise again, I'd bring others with me. Because the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. And trust me, I was just getting started. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't feel tired. I felt alive. It's funny, people think revenge drains you, but the right kind, the kind that comes from reclaiming your power, it fills your lungs like a sunrise. I brewed coffee dark enough to see the future in it, set out my late husband's old leather briefcase, and slipped on a navy suit I hadn't worn in a decade. It still fit. That was either a miracle or proof that rage burns calories. I wasn't going into the office that day. No, this part of the lesson would unfold elsewhere. First, I called the bank. I made sure every share, every account, every last digit of power in the company was under my control again. The banker, an overly polite man who sounded like he wore bow ties to bed, asked me gently if I was sure about rescinding my son's proxy rights. Darling, I said, I'm not just sure, I'm righteous. Then I called the lawyer. The woman who'd handled my husband's estate was a fierce creature named Angela Ross, silver-haired, sharp-tongued, the kind of attorney who'd argue with thunder and win. Angela, I said, we're revising the will. Oh, she asked. I could hear the smile in her voice. Is this a dramatic revision or a biblical one? Somewhere between Moses and a soap opera, I said. We met that afternoon at her office. She poured me tea and handed me the old file, my handwriting all over the margins. My husband and I had written that will together at the kitchen table after his second heart scare. We'd promised to leave half the company to our boy one day, because we believed in him. We didn't account for Naomi, or for the corrosion of gratitude. Angela read the new draft quietly. You're cutting him out completely? For now, I said. He needs to understand what legacy means. You don't inherit respect, you earn it. I'll provide for the grandchildren, of course. But he and his wife, they'll get nothing but the chance to do better next time. Angela nodded slowly. You know this will cause a stir. I smiled. Darling, I am the stir. When I left her office, the air felt lighter. The kind of lightness that comes after you stop carrying people who refuse to walk. That weekend, I started my next move. You see, my son had one weakness: not money, not power, but image. He and Naomi had built their entire marriage like a showroom. Perfect furniture, curated smiles, and no room for a single scuff mark. They hosted fundraisers for charities they couldn't pronounce. Naomi ran an online lifestyle page full of quotes about authenticity while editing her pictures like a hostage of her own vanity. I decided to use that. I invited the grandchildren for a sleepover, just them, no parents. Naomi hesitated, but my son, eager to patch things up on his terms, agreed. Just one night, he said, like he was loaning me sugar. The kids arrived with backpacks and wide eyes. I made hot cocoa with whipped cream towers and let them stay up past bedtime watching Home Alone. Halfway through, my grandson turned to me and said, Grandma, Mommy says you're confused. I smiled. Tell your mommy that Grandma's never been clearer. He grinned, satisfied. Kids know the truth before the adults teach them to doubt it. When they went to bed, I wrote a letter, not to my son, but to Naomi. I didn't mail it. I slipped it into her handbag the next day when she came to pick up the children. I watched her pull into my driveway with her perfect manicure and her practiced exhaustion. Thank you for having them, she said, not meeting my eyes. My pleasure, I said sweetly. They're the best part of both of you. She flinched slightly. I smiled wider. After she left, I imagined her reading the letter later, maybe on her designer sofa, a glass of Chardonnay trembling in her hand. Dear Naomi, I know you think you've won. You haven't. I know you think I'm weak because I'm kind, that I'm outdated because I'm old. But what you don't understand is that women like me built the world you're standing on. We don't crumble, we evolve. You've mistaken cruelty for sophistication, manipulation for intelligence. That's not power, dear. That's insecurity in a silk dress. You once told my son that I should sell my house and move closer to you. I'd rather turn it into a shelter for women leaving men like the ones you'll raise if you don't change. You tried to poison me. I switched the glasses. You drank your own lesson. I'm not coming after you. I don't need to. I'm just going to live better than you thought I could. That will be your punishment and his. Be careful with envy. It looks good on no one. Sophie. I knew it would rattle her, but I wasn't done rattling. 2 weeks later, I hosted an event at the company, a legacy luncheon, open to women in business across the state. Invitations went out to every newspaper, magazine, and local TV station. The headline in the press release read, Sophie Moore returns to lead more logistics and launches foundation for women entrepreneurs. When the article came out, Naomi posted a quote on her Instagram about forgiveness and moving on, right after posting a photo of herself at a spa. My son liked it within minutes. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, former employees, young women who wanted mentorship. It felt good, no, it felt right. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking to fit anyone's comfort. At the luncheon, I stood at the podium in front of 200 women and said, I built a business from scratch with a man I loved. When he died, I thought I was supposed to fade into gratitude and quiet. But gratitude doesn't mean surrender. Quiet doesn't mean invisible. We're allowed to start again at any age. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. I smiled not for vanity, but for victory. Afterward, my son called. His voice was tight, almost brittle. You blindsided us again, Mom. Good, I said. Maybe it'll improve your reflexes. He sighed. Naomi's upset. Tell her to read the letter. She did, he said slowly. She's furious. She said you threatened her. I didn't threaten her. I described consequences. He was quiet. You've changed, he said finally. No, I said. I just stopped apologizing for who I've always been. That night, I sat by the fire, a glass of bourbon in hand, and thought about legacy. My husband used to say, you can't teach people gratitude, Soph. You can only teach them consequences. I was teaching both. And somewhere in town, Naomi was probably pouring herself another glass of white wine, wondering how a woman she called pathetic had just taken back her entire life. But she hadn't seen the finale yet, because my next move, the one that would change everything, was already in motion. By the time January came around, the world had gotten used to me being back. I could see it in the way people looked at me in the office, half proud, half wary, like they were watching a legend walk around with her sleeves rolled up. My son, however, was still learning to breathe in this new atmosphere where his mother didn't play meek. I didn't avoid him. I made sure to stay visible, confident, untouchable. That's the trick when someone tries to steal your power. You show up so radiant they can't stand to look straight at you. Meanwhile, I had plans. Naomi had started calling the office occasionally, pretending to ask questions about the company. For family reasons, I never took her calls, but I made sure my assistant forwarded every voicemail straight to the board members. She didn't realize that half of them were women who'd read between her sugary lines faster than she could apply her lip gloss. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my son showed up at my office again. His face was tired, his suit a little too crisp. When men dress perfectly, it's usually because their confidence isn't. Mom, he said, shutting the door behind him. Can we talk privately? Of course, I said, glancing at my clock. I have 10 minutes before my meeting. Make it worth my time. He sat, rubbed his palms together. Naomi's having a hard time. People are talking. She says you're trying to ruin her reputation. I smiled slowly. Oh, darling, she did that herself. I just turned on the lights. He winced. You can't keep doing this. She's my wife, and you're my son, I said. But I don't see you protecting me when she lies about me at her dinner parties. She's embarrassed, he snapped. You humiliated her in front of everyone at Thanksgiving. She humiliated herself, I corrected. All I did was pull a tablecloth. He slumped back, shaking his head. You've changed. I've returned, I said. You just forgot who I was while you were busy becoming someone I don't recognize. That hit him. I saw it, the flicker of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to make me coffee when his father worked late. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "I got caught up in, well, everything." Naomi's parents, her expectations. They're always judging, always spending other people's money and calling it refinement. I offered. He laughed despite himself. "Something like that." I reached across the desk and took his hand. "Listen to me. You can still be the man your father wanted you to be, but you have to earn it. No shortcuts, no scheming. If you want to lead this company one day, show me integrity, not entitlement." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'll try harder," I said, and let go of his hand. That night, I actually felt a little hope. Maybe he'd woken up. Maybe this lesson was working. But then Naomi decided to test my patience one last time. She sent me an email, 4 paragraphs of fake civility ending with a line that nearly made me choke on my tea. "I think it would be better for the company if you handed things over gracefully, before people start asking questions about your mental stability." Mental stability. The gall of that woman. I didn't reply to her email. I just called the local paper. "Hello," I said to the young reporter who answered. "This is Sophie Moore. I'm launching a scholarship fund for women entrepreneurs. Would you like an exclusive interview?" You could practically hear him salivating through the phone. "Of course, Mrs. Moore." The article came out 2 days later with my picture on the front page, smiling like a storm that had learned manners. The piece painted me as a local hero, a pioneer returning to lift the next generation. The headline read, "Iron Magnolia, Sophie Moore reclaims her legacy and builds a future for women in business." The phone rang off the hook again. Invitations, congratulations, partnerships. Naomi must have read that article over her kale smoothie and nearly choked on her own envy. But the real masterpiece wasn't public, it was personal. I decided to host one more dinner. Not Thanksgiving, not Christmas, just a family gathering, as the invitation read. I invited my son, Naomi, and the grandchildren. No Naomi's parents, no restaurant food, just us. When they arrived, the table was set simply, no crystal, no linen tablecloths, no performance. Just roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie. My kitchen smelled like memory and second chances. Naomi walked in wearing a smile that could crack glass. "Lovely spread, Sophie," she said. "No tablecloth this time?" I looked her straight in the eye. "No need. I've already cleaned house." She blinked, not sure if I meant literally or metaphorically. The answer was both. Dinner started politely enough. My son tried small talk about the kids' school projects. Naomi complimented my pie like it was a science experiment she didn't expect to succeed. But under the politeness, there was tension, a hum you could almost hear. Halfway through dessert, I set down my fork. "There's something I want to say." My son stiffened. Naomi's eyes narrowed. "I've revised my will," I said calmly. "You'll each be receiving a copy in the mail." Naomi's smile faltered. "Oh, how responsible of you." "Yes," I said. "I've decided to leave the company shares to my grandchildren, in a trust. They'll inherit when they're old enough to know the value of work and respect." Naomi's fork froze mid-air. My son went pale. "Mom, you can't." "I can," I interrupted. "And I did. You two will receive nothing from the company. You've had your chance, and you wasted it." Naomi's jaw tightened. "You're punishing us?" "I'm protecting what I built," I said, "from people who don't know how to care for it." She laughed sharp, ugly. "You think anyone will believe you're in control? People already think you're losing it." "Oh, I'm perfectly sane," I said, standing. "Which is why you're sitting at my table and not the other way around." I walked to the door and opened it. "Dinner's over. The children can stay for dessert if they like. You two can go." My son looked torn, humiliated, furious. Naomi looked like she wanted to throw the pie in my face. "Mom," he said finally, voice cracking, "please." I softened just a fraction. "Son, when you learn how to stand up for what's right, you'll find the door open again. Until then, keep your wife's poison literal and figurative out of my life." Naomi gasped, color flooding her face. "You have no proof." "I don't need proof," I said quietly. "I have survival." They left, slamming doors, muttered curses, the whole tragic duet. I turned back to my grandchildren. My granddaughter looked up at me with her big curious eyes and asked, "Grandma, are Mommy and Daddy mad?" I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, but that's because they don't understand that love doesn't mean letting people hurt you." She nodded solemnly, as if I'd just told her one of life's great secrets, which I suppose I had. That night, after the kids were asleep, I stood by the window with a glass of bourbon and watched the moon rise. My reflection in the glass looked older, sure, but stronger too. My face had the lines of someone who'd lived fully, not fearfully. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Because I knew the final act of this story was coming. And it wouldn't just end my son's illusions, it would teach him the kind of truth that echoes. I'll tell you something most people never learn until it's too late. Peace isn't quiet, it's decisive. It doesn't whisper, it locks the door, files the paperwork, and pours a drink while the world bangs on the porch. That January night after the Last Supper, as Naomi's perfume still lingered in my hallway like a bad decision, I sat down with my bourbon and my thoughts. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved. Anger is fire, but resolve is steel. And I'd spent too many years mistaking smoke for substance. The next morning, I called Angela Ross, my lawyer again. Angela, I said, we need to finalize everything. I figured you'd say that, she said, the sound of a pen already clicking on her desk. I've got the trust documents ready for the grandchildren, and your son's name has been formally removed from the corporate succession plan. Good, I said. Make it airtight. I want him to learn how to work for something again. She chuckled softly. You're one hell of a mother, Sophie. No, I said. I'm finally being one. 2 weeks later, I hosted a press conference at the company headquarters. Cameras, reporters, the works. I stood behind that podium like a woman who had just reintroduced herself to her own spine. Good afternoon, I said. Today, More Logistics is launching the Legacy Initiative, a program dedicated to helping women over 40 start businesses of their own. Because we don't expire when people stop applauding. We begin again. Applause filled the room, real and warm. Flashbulbs popped like punctuation. And right there in the second row, Irony's favorite seat, sat my son. He looked small in that crowd. Naomi wasn't beside him. Rumor had it she'd gone to stay with her parents for space, which is rich, considering she never left anyone else any. When the cameras stopped rolling, he approached me slowly. Mom, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I read the article about the trust. Good, I said, signing a document. You didn't even tell me. I didn't need to. You told me everything I needed to know when you laughed at me over Thanksgiving dinner. He winced. I was stupid. True. I don't deserve forgiveness. I looked at him, then not the man, but the boy who used to sit at our kitchen table building Lego trucks while I cooked chili for his father. You're wrong, I said softly. You do. But forgiveness doesn't mean reinstatement. He swallowed hard. What do I do now? You grow, I said, and you earn. You stop following your wife's lead and start finding your own. Maybe one day, when you've built something honest, you'll understand why I did what I did. He nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he didn't argue. When he left, the board members gathered around me like bees to honey. Powerful speech, Mrs. Moore. Bradley, the reformed snake with the gelled hair, said. You're an inspiration, Bradley. I said with a wink. Inspiration is just what competence looks like when people aren't used to seeing women have it. He laughed nervously. He knew better than to disagree. That evening, I went home to a quiet house. The good kind of quiet, the one that hums with purpose, not absence. I sat by the fire, a journal on my lap, and started writing letters to my grandchildren. Not for now, but for someday. To my darling Lily, don't marry a man who laughs when you're right. And if you do, don't stay long enough to hear him laugh twice. To my sweet Ben, learn to cook something for yourself. Love a woman who respects her mother. If she doesn't, she'll never respect you. Each letter was sealed with a kiss of bourbon on my breath and tucked into a box marked for when they're ready. I'd barely finished when my doorbell rang. I sighed. You can't manifest peace without a few tests. Through the glass, I saw Naomi, alone, dressed down for once, jeans, sweater, hair loose. She looked human. I opened the door halfway. Naomi, Sophie, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound real. I came to say I'm sorry. Well, I said, leaning on the doorframe. That's a first. She nodded, eyes glistening. I don't know why I did half the things I did. I was jealous, maybe, of the way your son loves you, of the way people respect you. Jealousy's a poor diet, I said. It leaves you hollow. She exhaled, long and shaky. I just wanted you to like me. Oh, sweetheart, I said softly. I tried, but you wanted something else. You wanted me to disappear, and I don't do that anymore. She looked down, tears threatening. I know you'll never forgive me. You're wrong, I said. I already have. But forgiveness doesn't mean welcome. Her eyes flickered with something hurt, realization, maybe both. You'll never see me again, she whispered. Then maybe, I said, you'll finally see yourself. She left without another word. I closed the door, locked it, and felt something release inside me. The house seemed to sigh too. Spring came slow that year, the way healing does. My garden bloomed like it was showing off, the hydrangeas puffed up and proud. I spent my mornings walking barefoot in the dew, coffee in hand, no ghosts left to haunt me, just memories that had learned to behave. The grandchildren came every weekend. We baked cookies, we danced to Elvis, we laughed until our sides hurt. One afternoon, my grandson asked, "Grandma, why don't Mommy and Daddy come anymore?" I knelt beside him. Because sometimes, I said, grown-ups forget how to be kind, but kindness always finds its way back. He thought about that for a moment. Will it find them? Eventually, I said. And when it does, we'll leave the light on. By summer, the company was thriving again. Profits up, morale high, my name back on the wall in gold. The younger employees started calling me the Iron Magnolia. I pretended to hate it, but secretly, it made me smile. On the anniversary of my husband's death, I drove out to the lake where we used to fish. I brought his old thermos, filled with coffee and a splash of bourbon. The sun dipped low, gilding the water in honey. You'd laugh if you saw me now, Harold, I said out loud. Took me long enough to grow that backbone you always swore I had. The wind rustled the reeds like applause. That night, back home, I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd once cried over a ruined Thanksgiving. Now it felt like a stage where I'd performed the greatest act of my life, reclaiming myself. I wrote one last note, not for my children or grandchildren, but for myself. I taped it to the inside of the pantry door, where I'd see it every morning. Sophie, you were not crazy. You were not cruel. You were simply done being small. And when they tried to take your dignity, you served it back with pie. I laughed, poured one last glass of bourbon, and raised it to the woman staring back at me in the reflection of the window. Her hair was silver, her eyes still fire. I am Sophie, I said to the quiet night. And this was my last Thanksgiving with my family, but the first one with myself. And that, my dear, was worth every pulled tablecloth. Then I blew out the candle and let the peace decisive, earned, unshakable settle in like an old friend who'd finally come home.